This meeting is being recorded.
Hey, Ricky.
Hey.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's hot. It's very hot and hot.
I'm sure it's much hotter in Texas, but yeah, it's hot here too. Yeah.
We're having a heat wave.
Oh. Yeah.
Let's see. Anybody added anything to the agenda for this week?
Question. I don't know if that happened. Let's see.
I don't think I saw anything come in.
Yeah.
Oh.
Nope. Okay. Cool. Well, we have some things happening at least.
Yeah. I'm excited about this fix for this cursor jumping thing. let's start there. Maybe we can get this in.
Oh, a bunch of users confirmed it for both CDN and module side. So we released it. I hope that's okay. I was a little quick to pull the trigger on that, but it just seemed like.
Oh, is it in?
Yeah. There's enough user, like I got so many heart reacts and positive reacts, and people were saying it worked from the module side and from the CDN side, and it only required a change to plugins, so and a breaking change, but a positive breaking change in a way that simplifies things. It allows us to get away from the pattern of asking them to invoke their own set state, and then we solve it internally in the plugins. So it leads to a much smoother implementation for plugins. We moved away from like a hooks kind of or quasi hooks approach to loading plugins to you can just instantiate them in the global module scope and then pass them in, and then only need to use memo if you're passing in dynamic configuration to the plugins. So like for example, if there's user defined editor theme or something, code mirror theme or whatever, things like that. But yeah, I think for the most part, I think this will solve the problems, and it simplifies the you can look in the change log for like Explorer plugin if you're interested. It just explains the difference. Okay.
Easier. That's awesome. Here's the only concern I have is that there was one commenter who said that let me find it here.
On the ticket, the issue ticket?
On the issue, 2859 says that they disabled the plugin, the Explorer plugin, which was what we thought was the issue and still might be. They said they disabled it and that they still saw it happening. And so the reason that I backed away from this was because I thought it had to do with those context layers and complication and re-rendering and all of the memos and callbacks that are a part of that context stack. So
the other issue is that if you look, that user's still passing in query, which, like when they said that they disabled the plugin. All right, I think. No, sorry, go ahead. I think I'm looking at the wrong one.
My only concern is that there could be an underlying issue there still.
Well, we had several places where people were seeing the issue and then they installed it and it fixed the issue. They installed like the Canary release and they said, yeah, that does it. So, I mean, if it doesn't solve the issue, then we'll figure out something else. But the plugins internally were doing, this stuff with passing the query to both the plugin and to graphical, and I think we just want to avoid that I think it's also partially could be a result of instantiating the plugins within the component lifecycle. I think like instantiating is in returning the function that just passes the props in. I think this approach to having them move that instantiation out of the React lifecycle and only pulling it into the React lifecycle where needed should help in most cases. And if this solves the issue for some people, then that's great. If we see it again, then it might be a deeper issue to address. So, but I wanted to make sure that we had something before Dimitri finishes the Monaco rewrite. He's on holiday right now, but so I think this will make things. I think this will do it because a few people said it seemed to fix the issue, and I was able to recreate the issue in the Webpack example where we install the Graphical Explorer plugin. But I think the problem is if there's other users that are passing in the query value and set state with other implementations, it could be that that's also causing the issue. So even if you're not using the plugins, just this behavior of turning graphical into a controlled component seems to cause issues. It's always caused issues even before the rewrite, but I think now because of changes in the life cycle, it causes this jumping issue. But there's other things, as I'm sure you know, you're keenly aware from being involved in the rewrite of that could be causing the jumping issue. But I'm hoping this solves it. Multiple users reported it, fixed the issue. So
yeah, it's a great fix. And you're right that it doesn't solve the problem of users being able to pass both the current query value and the setter for the query value around on their own, just because of the way that it comes out of context. You could do whatever you want to with it, and if it's firing multiple times in an array,
it's messy. There used to be like early, I think maybe I wrote this a while ago or something, but there used to be a way where when you did pass that, it kind of automatically moved into a controlled component state. You see this sometimes with some of the editor, like just like the generic React Monaco, React Code Mirror editor components will have this behavior. You see it with other types of complex components as well, where there's an input and an on-change handler, that there's like a controlled state and then an uncontrolled state. And when you're passing in both the value and onset and you're controlling this, you're trying to control the query state outside of the component, then that's what you would call like a controlled component versus uncontrolled. It's just that way even with form components, for example. So like if you have I think that's an oversimplification of how controlled and uncontrolled state works, but it's a thing, and it's a thing where maybe we want to like as I recall, the on-change handler should be used for like firing an event when the change happens, and not for. Well, I guess that would be part of controlling it. Yeah, it's a tricky thing for sure.
Well,
and then there's this whole
the difficult part. Let me read this here. It's so hard. I mean, if you just look at the query editor component in graphical, it's just so hard to read. It's over 500 lines of code, and
it used to be a lot simpler.
Well, I mean,
it's more complex by necessity, of course. But I wonder if we can't make it a little easier to work with, and also the hooks. It's just it's mostly because there's outside logic kind of baked into it. It'd be cool if we could pull some of that logic out and pull it and have it, the other logic happen by using hooks that also hook to the editor event. So there would just be a simple way where it's handling the query there. And then if you're using some of these other features that for example, the whole logic of collecting the operation names on change, it'd be cool to pull that out of the query editor itself somehow. Things like that, I think, would really help simplify it. So that's something that we can look to towards the refactor when we're adding Monaco support.
This changes drastically with Monaco. This is
Yeah.
all of this complication, not all of it, much of this complication goes away, because we don't have to track the editor state inside the component. You track that state outside of the component, and then you can just react to it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the Monaco is very based on its event emitters, and you can handle the events in multiple places. Though the tricky thing with that is dealing with race conditions and not being able to guarantee the order in which events fire and whatnot. But there are some ways that we can cut down on the complexity and some of the the loading of modules and things like that we have to do in CodeMirror 5. So I'm hoping to cut down on some of that complexity. Another thing that I think is going to help cut down on complexity in graphical React is I plan on finally, as we had charted out years ago with graphical plugins, to move the history, the query history tool and the Doc Explorer tool into their own plugins.
Yeah.
And this will cut down on the complexity of graphical React, I think, and also allow us to show some like advanced plugin integration examples, for people to work from. And it might require us to extend the API a bit. I don't think though. Like I think we can have our own. We can move those contexts to the plugin itself and just use the editor context separately, like, because that context will still be wrapped in the editor context. So what that means is we won't need to like have something where plugins can provide a context that's globally loaded. I don't think we'll need that, like, because we can use the graphical React SDK hooks to handle all the events that we need. So if we need to handle the documentation click event, then we can show how Doc Explorer does that, and then other people can use that to say, okay, now I'm going to make my Doc Explorer that handles when you click on a symbol in the hover popover that opens that Doc Explorer pane, and those kinds of tricky things that seem difficult to do with plugins, but because when you create a plugin, you have already the whole editor context and the operations, like all the different contexts available. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to provide any more, like the Doc Explorer context doesn't need to wrap the whole thing. It can just wrap the Doc Explorer plugin. You see what I mean?
I don't think that that's entirely true. Maybe that's just based on the way that it's used now. But so for instance, here's an example, right? The history context is used in the main executor when you try to run an operation. I'm tracking it down right now.
Yes, but here's the thing: is we can move that out because now we can track operation change using the graphical React SDK within the history plugin context. Do you see what I mean? So within the plugin history, we can just use hooks to handle those events rather than baking that logic into the events itself. So this is how
these are.
I think it will really simplify things, and it'll create more layers of domain separation where we're not baking in the logic of history and the logic that sounds fancy, the logic of the Doc Explorer into the execution and schema loading, these other things that need to be, they should be independent, and then it will lead to a kind of decoupling where the logic of the history or Doc Explorer component won't be in graphical SDK at all. but we'll have those be installed by default with graphical package. I'm not sure what we'll do for like an override there, but we'll figure out something. And that also means we can pull some of those Doc Explorer and History Explorer specific props out into the plugin props, and then show people how to instantiate that in a easier way, perhaps, or with less, top-down plugin or top-down prop bloat, of having 80 configuration props for graphical. We can cut down on that a bit.
Now that I'm looking at this in a little more detail, it looks like Thomas already has the Doc Explorer and History. It looks like they're set up pretty well to get pulled out.
I don't think it'll be a big issue anymore. There's a couple places where there might be some crossover still, and we'll just use the hooks themselves to or add hooks if needed, but we probably shouldn't need to. Like we already have the execution context, so we should be able to expose like the event we need to, add a use effect hook that waits for the, whatever. I don't know. I don't know the refactor that well. The code base is still a little confusing for me at times, but we'll have some way to be able to tell, this is executing, this is finished executing, etc. I hope to get even more advanced with this because when adding plugins for, say, like results, right? The results pane, I would like, and maybe this doesn't make sense as a plugin. Maybe it should be a core use case, but users have requested a more Apollo Studio I shouldn't compare it to that, but like a more iterative result-friendly results pane for like WebSocket subscriptions, right? Or whatever transport they're using for subscriptions. So we should be able to get like a little pane that iterates examples of each result and whatever metadata came with that payload, etc. Another plugin I want to have is users want to have is like a kind of network like results or network data page or tab rather, so that when a operation is completed, you can see the headers and other additional data. Even though it's technically there in your developer toolbar, it's annoying to have to open that to see that. And a lot of people need that for a lot of reasons. So, like, it's kind of probably annoying to be able to send a request header, but not be able to see the response headers, like if you're debugging something, So, yeah.
Yeah. Whether it is a core feature or not, it should all still be in a plugin. We talked about that before. That everything should be a plugin.
We can make a lot of things plugins. I think, for example, it's even possible that we could make, the operation selector drop down could be a plugin, or some of these other baked in features that are just kind of in there could be plugins. So yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. So I want to introduce a plugin type key that like an enum that we can build on. And right now, what we have the toolbar plugins. So by default, if you don't provide a plugin type, it's a toolbar plugin. But otherwise, you can provide other ones. And then there might be like the ability to do override. So if it's like eventually we'll have non-display oriented plugins. So maybe there won't be an icon required, for example, in the, or overload would be the term for that in TypeScript. So there's a few different tricks, like how Vite plugins have several different, I've been working with Vite plugins a lot, so they've been giving me inspiration. Not exactly applicable, but I like that there's different types of signatures they support. And that some handy things there. But either way, yeah. And also, I figured out, this is, I think, what's going, and this is from the GraphiQL Berlin feedback. We had a GraphiQL Berlin meetup, and we got to talk to a lot of users, like me and Thomas in person got to talk to a bunch of users who, you know, are using it in a way where it's facing commercially to their users, right? We're able to give us a lot of feedback, and this was one of the key bugs that was bothering people. Oh no. Yeah. Okay. Some people just are very excited about the bug fix. Okay. So we'll see, though. We'll see. Let's temper our expectations. Let's expect some cases where it might still be an issue. But yeah. So like, I didn't test it in Next.js, for example. There's some things that I want to test more. But yeah. So with plugins, I found that actually without adding in a way that actually reduces complexity in the repo, it's I think it's PR 3326 or 3328. Yeah, I know. It's weird to actually be kind of, yeah, 3328.
I got it.
Yeah, so here I'm going to propose creating this a simple, just a starting point of a graphical plugin utils package that provides, just for now, a Vite plugin and a shared TS config. And then eventually we can have a create graphical plugin. We can also, the Vite plugin does quite a bit, and it just kind of front loads some conventions and expectations. There's a couple things I'm going to tweak from what's in that PR. Like, for example, we've decided with the plugins at 020 that we're just going to publish the UMD bundle at index.umd.js just to make it consistent and simple instead of like dash plugin dash name, you know, whatever. So that should cut down on some things. But the Vite plugin will allow us to encapsulate a lot of conventions and will lead to like a simple Vite config file that's like 3 lines long, 4 lines long. That's just like load this Vite plugin. And then you like, I use a config plugin approach where it actually configures everything for you and even is able to load your package.json and add externals in different cases and things like that. So it will take care of some of that. And what I hope to do, I went way down this road, and I'm sure you've been down it too, is to get the Vite dev mode to actually load a graphical instance with your plugin already in it. And I've like,
Oh yeah. Oh,
this is one of the hardest parts about Vite, is that it's very opinionated about this index HTML stuff. And what I don't want is to have this like create graphical plugin CLI, like install this index.html that you have to go and manually update or try to manually mess with. Like what I prefer to do, and there is this opportunity we have that could be really nice, where there's this middleware that allows you to rewrite parts of the HTML. It's meant for like text replacement, but I think we could just use that to just add everything we need and your plugin in this rewrite script where it just like replace main and head, you know, replace head with this, replace main with this, and just have this like a function that generates the preview output with your plugin, like already installed with no configuration. That's the goal. I think it's possible. Or maybe just like one small stub file where you instantiate graphical with your plugin, you know? We might have to do it just with ESM. It would be nice to do it with UMD, but like it's probably going to be easier to do, as you know, with Vite, because Vite prefers ESM because of ESBuild and how role is configured. So, but yeah, I think it's a good opportunity for us. And it also leads to consistent build outputs, And then also what I want to do is have like a simple validation tool that validates that your package.json follows the conventions. So if you're specifying exports and things like that, that everything is where it's supposed to be. I'm looking for an existing library that might already exist for this, that validates like pre-publish, you've built the bundles for your scripts, you're about to publish. Let's make sure that what you have in your package.json exports matches what's actually there, and that you're not accidentally publishing for files that aren't there. I'd like to add this other parts of the repo because we've had issues of, where we change something with the bundler and a file gets renamed, an extension is renamed or whatever. And it'd be nice to have some assurances there. But at least, I think this would be helpful. I'm adding plugin docs here too, and I hope to make it. I want to ease the process of people publishing their own plugins, because technically, you've been able to, users have been able to publish plugins outside of our mono repo this whole time, but the people at GraphiQL Berlin were like, how? We weren't sure if it's possible. We assumed that because we couldn't find any docs on plugins, which is docs, there's always missing docs for everything with this much complexity. So if we just start with some plugin docs and say, hey, you can just create a new repo and publish it this way. You can't use our graphical scope, but you can publish anything that you want, and then this is how you would install it. This is how you would install your own published graphical plugin. And if you want to, you can call it graphical-plugin-whatever on NPM, and that might help us find it more easily if we ever want to have a plugin registry at some point. But for now, we're not going to be doing anything with users are talking about the dynamic import idea we talked about years ago as well. And that would be cool to allow users to install plugins on their own time, but we don't have a team of 3 full-time people on this, so we're not ready for that yet. We know it's possible, but the complexity is a lot, and the necessity is just not there yet, right? Most of our users want to have, plugins pre-configured and shipped based on their framework's needs or their platform's needs and things that tie into their framework or their platform. And we've exposed this user settings dialog as a way to give users more control, and we can add to that. But user-defined plugins is a bit far down the road in my mind. We need to be able to do more with plugins, create a more consistent, easy to set up environment for adding plugins, make our mono repo friendlier for people who want to contribute plugins, but also make it clear to them that they can publish their own without coming to our mono repo. I think that's going to be important, because I think in our mono repo, we're going to get to the point once we, expose nice docs for this, that we're going to be getting, I think copy, export or the code export plugin, it's probably on the edge of what we should be supporting and not, right?
I don't even know if we should be supporting that one. But
they can always move out if we want them to, So
I mean, they should, and they would have if those original repositories were still maintained. Those were abandoned 4 years ago, and we only took them on because they were commonplace.
Yes.
Right?
I've actually thought about creating my own graphical community mono repo that's under my name, that's not officially GraphQL Foundation supported, that's just the user land for everything we won't officially support, with a big clear disclaimer of saying these are not officially maintained things, but this is where
there's some guarantee for them to be up to date and working.
Yes, that there's a community of people that can be invited to up, and then that's where we finish the playground parody. I feel like when it comes to create graphical function and server middlewares to automatically load your graphical. We've had multiple people request like just a plain Docker image for loading graphical, which feels silly to me. But I mean, eventually that could be a more complex thing with a backend if people want to do that. Now that we have the ability to store query history and other things asynchronously, like the local storage adapter could be turned into like a network interface, for example, if we wanted. There's a bunch of options there, but either way, yeah, it could be its own user land, and that's where like some of these plugins could go if people don't want to just publish their own repo, which is another thing they can do. For example, I could show, Gatsby or Heroku or no, not Heroku, Hashura, all these different platforms, how to, publish their own graphical plugins from their repos that they support, from their own ecosystem. And
so HighGraph is another one. They have they're still on the previous version of GraphiQL, as far as I remember, and they have an internal plugin that Jamie Barton was explaining this to me recently. They have an internal plugin that they're using to share like tab state, or not tab state. They're on the first version. So it's operate like document editor state, so that you can just share that around the team,
without a server, or with a.
I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know the details. That there has to be.
That's what I was thinking of doing with that middleware approach, is maybe even making like a simple static, plug in your backend type server, or whatever. It gets real messy and complicated once we go down that road, because our main job is to support this complex, seemingly simple tool. So like, that's a great responsibility for platforms to figure out themselves. But like I and several users have proposed, what if there was like a reference implementation GraphQL server that could be used to share, state and persist user configuration across instances.
I think
that would be cool.
An easier version of that initially would be to write a plugin that uses that you authenticate through GitHub, and then it writes it to a gist with something
like that could work. Yeah.
Fixed name, something like that. But the point I was making was that like HighGraph is another, they're also using it, and they're still on the first version. Like they clearly need some inspiration or an easier path to getting upgraded into the more modern version of GraphiQL. One thing I want to mention before I forget is that we were talking about making graphical. We were talking about the complexities around Vite's index.html file and how that's really just a pain. So there's a PR 2925 that's in draft that I filed last year, where I wrote a Vite plugin that allows real-time transformation of that index.html file.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. There's a middleware method that allows you to transform your HTML. Yeah. So that's what I plan on doing.
Yeah, 2925.
But you have a PR for that? Okay.
Yeah, 2925. Have a look at it. I'll just send it to you.
Yeah. The method I was planning on using, I think it's just called transform HTML.
So this is a separate plugin. I mean, it's just a custom Vite plugin.
No, it's not a plugin. It's a plugin API method. Let me look it up. It's like, what is it? HTML. Transform index HTML is the method. Yep. So I was going to make our plugin do that.
Yeah,
so you already have one?
Yeah. Follow. I shared a link in Discord. Go hit that link.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Okay. Cool. Visualizer.
So
Roll
basically,
up.
you just stub out inside the index.html file everything that you want to replace.
Oh, that's an analyzer. Okay. You did it. Yay, thank you. Yeah, I had already started working on this the other day, so I'm glad you already did it. But yeah, transform index HTML. Yeah.
Yeah. So this
That
is
is what I was planning on using. But I decided to make it simpler for now. So in 32, 30 is about build output and auto configuration, and just some simple starting things for now. It sets up the plugins for you and everything. So all you need is just this one plugin to get started. But then, yeah, I was hoping to do this. Basically, was just to create replacement script to transform index HTML. But I decided I switched context to the bug fix. This is just 2 days ago. So yeah, I will definitely use this. I don't think I'm ready to convert GraphiQL to do this yet, but I would like to use something similar for plugins, so that plugins can load GraphiQL. What I'll do is I'll have it. Maybe I'll create 2 different versions of the plugin. One that's for outside consumers, or maybe it will have like a config flag where whether if you're inside GraphiQL monorepo, it would load the locally built GraphiQL. And then if you're outside the monorepo, it would load the latest release of GraphiQL, or it would load it from your dev dependencies or something, you know.
Yeah.
And then that way you could be in a standalone repo, but have the full GraphiQL experience with just your plugin. I like the way you went about this, though. I think the one thing I'll have to figure out for that outside experience is like, let's see, yeah, like how do we an external GraphiQL plugin in a standalone repo? We'll have to figure out like, does each plugin have its own little like example script that is the example implementation of that plugin, so you can mess around with different config options and how they work in the full GraphiQL, things like that. So yeah, I think this is awesome. This will be great.
So Jamie Barton and I are working on a project outside of GraphBase, or I mean, sort of tangentially related to GraphBase. We're working on a project that uses GraphiQL, and we're writing a plugin for it. So that plugin can be, and it's gonna take a little while. Probably take us. I think we're kind of hoping to get it ready before September 19th, before the conference, but it'll be a good opportunity for me to get back into the plugin. I mean, I haven't looked at this for. I'm just looking at this PR right now. I haven't looked at this for a long time. It'll be a good opportunity to while we're actually building a new plugin. So this plugin is to share tab state, basically, right? So everything.
That's awesome.
You can just share the state, and it just gives you a URL that you can hit, and it'll load GraphiQL for you with the state of the tab or tabs, like as you left it. So this will give us a good chance to build a plugin and feel the pain of what that's like. So we're building it in a repo. We're gonna build, where GraphiQL is one of our dependencies. We're just gonna build a plugin in that repo for now.
Cool.
It'll just
hopefully I can help enable that with this plugin I just linked in the chat. So so if we So this is a starting point. It's just a build configuration and plugin auto configuration. It handles outputting your DTS file and everything and sets up the whole build configuration. But as you can see in the checklist, my next step was to do this transform HTML, to use that transform HTML hook similarly. So that I think should make it much easier for you all to make this custom plugin. Another thing that came up at GraphiQL Berlin was people have hit some like the ceiling of design customization to some degree. There's a feeling that the CSS variables aren't dynamic or aren't replete enough to be able to override everything. And
yeah, we've heard this in the past, but it was never like a critical mass that
right.
that required it. It just hadn't hit the graphical level of needs attention.
Yeah.
But Patrick had this with this was early on after we launched 2. I'm not even going to bother trying to find the issue or the Discord conversation, but Patrick, when he was working on Strawberry and he was trying to integrate the new, must have been August or September of last year, he was just trying to get Graphical 2 working, and he just wanted to change the background color. You know, he just wanted to get rid of that that purpley blue that's back there in the dark version, and there wasn't like, I don't know how he figured it out. I don't use Strawberry, so I didn't go and look.
Yeah,
but
this is something that we should definitely have documentation for as well. So alongside plugins, I'd like to create a theming.md file that documents all the CSS variables and gives like an example of a custom theme. And then we can use that as the barometer of saying like, okay, let's override everything we can. Let's make it look completely different for a different design, hypothetical design. This is how I was originally setting it up with Gatsby, but I didn't have a product designer in time to help me with it. Was we were going to have a Gatsby design and the graphical official design and have both at the same, like release the graphical design and then the Gatsby one that's looked completely different, or as, you know, at least color typography wise as possible. So yeah, I think this is something that we can just improve on, and we can maybe just create a theme example ourselves to test the limits. Or maybe just work closely with Patrick too, because Patrick's already a co-maintainer now. And so, you know, just where there's someone already has a entirely different, like at least visually color typography wise theme that they want to implement, and that make sure that we check all the boxes. And for things that don't work, we just add CSS variables, you know, and make sure that we have useful CSS variables to override for a real world, you know, example product design, you know.
Yeah. One of the things.
Sailor is this company from Wrocław, Poland, that was at GraphiQL Berlin, and they have a highly customized implementation, and they were talking about some of the limits that they ran into with CSS variables, and that they had to use some of they had to do some manual CSS override type things that were tricky.
Yeah, it's not just the way that we're using the variables, because there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the way that we're semantically naming everything.
I don't think there's anything wrong, but we might just be missing some features. Yeah.
Well, something I brought up early on in this design was that the design is working on transparent layers. These are alpha layers that are on top of each other. So even if you wanted to change a blue button to red, you say red, make it red, it's because of the way that alpha is used, it's not red. You don't get that color. And so early on, I was suggesting that we drop the use of alpha entirely, because you're getting too many shades. You start layering these alpha, you stack these neutral alpha colors, and you end up with infinite variations depending on how many layers you're using, like a button that's on top of a div that's on top.
I remember this conversation now. Yes. There's ways I think that we could
without grabbing the CSS class names and manually overriding them, like you said that Sailor was likely doing. There's no way to just toss in a theme object with a dozen of your own colors, like semantically named to match the variables. There's no way to override it and have it match. Even if you had a Figma file where you were like replacing them, it wouldn't look the same in the app because of the use of the alpha color. So theming is, it's incredibly difficult.
Okay. I wonder, I need to take a closer look at this, but I wonder if there's a way that we can implement the CSS variables to make this easier to override. And then for our own instances of those variables, we bring the alpha channel back in, but people have the option of just doing normal, what would it be? I'm going to sound really silly when I try to HSL and not HSLA, right? Like, is that what we do now in CSS? Like, so
Yeah,
like you would have the option of doing one or other, right? That you could provide alpha channel colors if you want, or you could just have normal, not, you know, HSL style colors or RGBA or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's unnecessary to be using the alpha channels at all. Like as a reference implementation, I think that we should, you know, one thing that we might think about doing is just vastly simplifying the palettes for the dark and the light theme. Like just go like Vercel level simple. Like there are no alphas, no nothing, and then provide overrides. Stellate uses these alpha, like they do it alpha like in their own design, which is why it was done this way last year. And I don't know, other than feeding in.
What I'm saying is there a way that we could make it so that the CSS variables can be overridden for normal colors without alphas, but then we still provide the alphas. But if we just use flat, you know, non-alpha channels, that's fine. Yeah.
Well, they're combined right now. So if you look at, let me share my screen.
Yeah, because if people are just overriding CSS classes again, we're still kind of at a graphical 1 or graphical 0 level of theme customization. You know.
Yeah, it just kind of makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me find that. Here we go.
But what I'd like to do is to make it so that you can use either simple non-alpha aware colors or more complex colors with alpha channels without. Yeah.
Let me zoom in here. I want to show you just so you can see this without having to dig into it. So what we're looking at is this like dual editor section here, right, with the tabs at the top. Called graphical sessions. The background color. Oops. Background color is a combination of 2 variables, and HLSA is hard coded. So we get.
Yeah, see, this is what I'm talking about. That we could provide a background color or background light, whatever variable, and that if you want, you can provide an HLSA color, and we might still provide that in our implementation of the theme, but you would be able to just make that, you know, like a hex if you want it or whatever, like without having to. Yeah.
And what I think we need is a simpler base palette, and we need just like if I remember correctly, we only need somewhere between like 8 and a dozen just semantic theme, theme options. One of them is just background color, right? And so we drop entirely this complicated, like you can pass in a new alpha background light, but you're never, like, unless you have a Figma file and you like have it all set up with the tokens, never going to be able to like design that in a way that it's going to look at least easily the way that it's going to look
this is something that should be like a user-defined theme implementation detail of
Yeah,
saying
so
like, okay, if you want to have variables that are used for your own nuance HSLA colors, you provide those as variables. So you have background color, and it's, you know, a variable that is a combination of your own variables that you're using for your alpha channel stuff, but it's not baked into the theme. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
or it's not baked into the theme implementation details like this. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, this is something we should have done a while ago, and it's something we can fix and we can document, and we can say, here's how to do a very plain override of a, you know, let's say Vercel style. Let's make graphical look like it's embedded in the Vercel dashboard, for example, and we show just simple.
I was only using that as an example because for the folks that are familiar with their palette, they use just a very like simple palette. Yeah. It's not complicated like, you know, radix colors or anything like that. It's just simpler. It's just easier to understand. It means that you start with a smaller base number, but then you just introduce this idea where the theme that is a prop that you could pass in is it's disconnected from the actual theme that you're using on the website, where you just pull out all the semantic names that you want, and that's what you're allowing people to pass in as as theme options. And the actual underlying theme is just it's complete. It could be as complicated or as gnarly as you want, but you're just saying like these are the bits that people are going to recognize, or people are going to recognize that they want to change these specific parts of the UI. Here's the way that you do that without having to, you know, do the mental gymnastics around like how to do the alpha stuff. And that means as a first step,
we can pull this out and then have our own whatever implementation, whether there's alphas or not, but we make it so that there's just a background color variable, or, you know, theme, you know, like foreground color, whatever, you know, the different, whatever naming conventions we want. I've worked on many design systems that have different, you know, conventions, but we can just pick one set of variables. We've also been moved to radix. So it's possible that we can build off of some of radix's CSS variable goodness as well. I don't know if you noticed that, but yeah, that's something that we might be able to do as well. But for the most part, we can start with colors, and then we can make sure that the typefaces, there's a variable for the font family, right? Is there? In fonts, typefaces and all? Like, because that could be a next step. That might be more complicated, because if someone brings in a different typeface, the spacings might be off. So then we might need to give them also the font size and some kind of spacing multiplier.
We have those. We have that in. That's already in.
Sorry, I should have the actual theme CSS variables in front of me. But what I'd like to do is, be able to have like at least one example that's just like, here's what, you know, graphical looks like with a custom theme. You know.
Well, there's a reason that
there's a reason that no one.
There's a reason why no one has done that yet.
Because it's hard, and I think this is something we can improve on. I've heard of one user I remember saying that they would just set the HSLA both variants to the same color to get around it. I'm like, that's not how it should be. We can do better, you know. And then if we want to keep the alpha channels, we can, but we supply a whole variable that's HLS, like for background color variable, we supply that full HSLA, this RGBA and that RGBA, whatever we're doing. You know, like if you want to, like, being like, it's flexible enough that you can add that complexity, but you can also just have simple, like, you know, who knows, like some of our users are people who make and they just make server frameworks in other languages. They're not web developers, and maybe they just want hex values or simple RGBA. They're not interested in this complexity, but they want a custom theme for their, server in Elixir or Scala or Python or whatever. Pythonists are more into design, but it's just each community has its own needs, and it does. But most of those communities don't need alpha channel layers like in their theme. So yeah, I think this is something we can improve on, and then check off other boxes if we need to.
I think it's wishful thinking to expect that we can offer like a simple version and a complicated version. All like complicated meaning uses alpha, right? In this context, uses alpha as complicated at the same time. And a better option is to flip the way that we're doing it right now, where alpha is the default and you have to like go hard to override all of it.
What I'm saying is we just have a simple, like, I think we're in agreement, actually. And it sounds like we're not. What I'm saying is, like, for example, there should just be a background color variable.
Let me finish the
thought.
thought.
You can add alpha channels to that if you want, or you can just make it black.
Yeah, let me finish the thought. We flip the way that we're doing it now, and we have a much simpler way to just define a default theme using semantic values, like we're talking about, just like you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
If somebody wants a more complicated alpha full UI, those installations, which as far as I can tell would be way less. Those are in the minority rather than being in the majority.
Definitely. The majority of people just want a simple,
The minority of people that want a much more complicated setup in terms of the styling, those installations should be grabbing class names and doing hard overrides, and that world should be, what we're finding people are doing right now is they just want to override some like kind of simple styles, and they're having to reach out and grab class names and we should just flip it. Like these are,
it should be right. The simple approach, the 90% approach. That's really what we need to do with this mass user land open source is make it easy to support the 90% of use cases, and then the other 10%, they can figure that out. And that's not supported, but hey, we've got some class names for you if you want to do that,
Yeah, and that already exists, right? Like
that exists. Yeah,
are already there.
Exactly. So yeah, I think we can dial it in. I think there's also a way that someone who's like, if we had these like simpler variables where instead of interoperating the variables inside and hard coding the HSLA, if we just had a static variable that the background color is or whatever, for example,
then whenever you
you can pass in whatever you want. They can use their own variables to create their HLSA mix in, goodness, and shows how old I am. I called it a mix-in, but yeah,
we already have Thomas built in with the way that he's using CSS variables, a really solid foundation for that because it's semi-semantic already. We just need to build out we need to abstract that even further, I think, like at the theme prop level. And then we need to make sure that Thomas and the Stellate, like we need to do all that replacement and get it in as a draft PR, and then make sure that the only installation I know that's heavily using the default theme by choice is Stellate, because that's just they did it right.
Exactly.
So we just need to make sure that they're able to get the overrides that they want via the class names, and then I think that would be good to go. But step one would just be a PR, and that's replacing a lot of it. But that also means
be a breaking change area. We could slate it for 4.0, like just here's some breaking changes coming down the pipeline. And this actually brings up another question or another thought that I have working with graphical React more is how do you feel about graphical React even having styles? Class names is another issue, but just having its own styles versus all the styles in graphical React, do you think that maybe they belong inside graphical?
Let me look at what's in graphical React right now.
Because in graphical React, that's where we specify all the CSS for some of these components. But what if the components were like radix primitives, where they're totally unstyled or minimize reset styling, and then in graphical, that's where we have all the more complex CSS styles. Thus, someone who wants to go more hardcore can just go with graphical React and build their own custom editor with its own display and style things exactly the way that they want.
Yeah, so a couple of,
it's a domain separation issue in my mind.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. Number one, radix is dead. Long live radix. And so it's a problem that we're just now getting into it.
No. Oh dear.
The second thing, and more importantly, because
I thought it was revived though.
Primitives is still in play. There's a lot of talk about whether or not the team that built it originally is still actually, really fully dedicated to it in their implementation and modules.
Somewhere there's someone talking about this with graphical. No, I'm just joking.
No, it's true. It's totally true.
Is graphical still maintained? Someone asked that at graphical.
I just wonder if there's plenty of activity in the radix primitives repository. There's just better alternatives that are popping up. This is the ebb and the flow of UI. This is, we all know this. But anyway, that's the first point. The second point is that, just to directly address the question of whether or not we can pull styles outside of graphical React, even if we had a separate package that was just a core library of primitives, I think graphical React would still need styles for a lot of like atomic CSS, like for more of like the molecular and organism components, there would still need to be.
Yes, I agree in that. But I think a lot of the more design specific things that have to do with the specific layout of graphical and like the graphical itself and, other specific features could live in graphical workspace.
I would take it. I would just put it in another. There would be another library. That's
just styles or something.
Well,
just the primitive components.
Yeah. So the way that we've set up Pathfinder at GraphBase is that there's a UI library that exports like atomic components, and it also exports all of we use stitches currently. It exports all of the styling, right? So everything comes out of the UI library wherever you're using it, whether you're using it in the Pathfinder package or in our dashboard.
Yeah, this is how we originally did it in 2019. Lara from Facebook and Orta collaborated on a set of design components in a storybook that were just primitive, like molecular components that had no state or anything and were designed to be used to build graphical two and or one, I think even is what we were going for at that point. And that's what we did. And it was all in the same project, but they were in different, there was like a components directory. You might remember seeing this a while ago, but it was like, it was set up for that, like for that, with that convention. And I guess that was part of the problem of this just having a graphical React bucket for everything that's React, because you want to have your molecular atomic components separated out from your state aware components that have hooks and everything tied in. And so we got close to that, but I think there's still some domain separation that could happen. So we could have like graphical UI, and then graphical React separately, and then graphical would compose those together, for example, or React components, or I don't know, something, a graphical React dash components and graphical React dash state, for example, and the state one would just be hooks and contexts, and I don't know. There's different ways we could slice and dice it, but I think there's still something to be done there that could also reduce the complexity of graphical React and make it easier to document how to use it. And maybe, I don't think we need to worry about that too much, because it seems like with the plugin API, people are happy, and the new design.
I think enhancing, you're on the right track. Enhancing the plugin API is like the best thing that we can do right away. And until the level of, remember, like early last year and even the year before, there's loads of enthusiasm for like, I don't use React. I want to recreate graphical with Vue or Angular or whatever. Until that enthusiasm comes back and people are asking for that again, there's really very little value in breaking apart graphical React, right? Like reducing the context complexity can be done by just pulling out the plugins, right? There's a lot of stuff in there that we can just pull out. So I think we can get a twofer with this, if we, like you're doing, moving the focus over to the plugin architecture and how all of that works. We're going to get a lot of general cleanup and better understanding of the repository just by doing that,
and more implicit design, like domain separation. And I think the same thing will happen if we have like a theme example. Like, for example, I'm thinking of making graphical Webpack become like I have it now set up so that it deploys with Netlify again at /Webpack. So if you go to graphical test.netlify/Webpack, then you get a plugin consuming build, and then that's where we can dump all the kitchen sink level examples. I'm thinking that's where we could even do a custom theme where we say, here's a Windows XP theme for graphical. Not just joking, but like the old Winamp or whatever. I don't know. There's things we can do there for sure, and then that's where we might find that, oh well, it seems like we don't have a variable for border radiuses or something, and some people want a less bubbly design. So there's all kinds of things that we'll probably discover by going down that road, but we'll also learn just from getting feedback. Here's another thing: we could open a discussion about the themes and just asking, hey, does anyone have open source themes that they want to share with us, and let's see what you're having to do with class overrides and see how we can make that a little easier. See if like we see there's 6 open source projects doing the same override of the same class in the same way, we could say, okay, maybe we should have a variable for that or something.
Yeah,
or maybe we can do this better.
I'm quite curious about the Sailor team from Rockwell. I want to just poke around. What's their app? Is it just Sailor, like Sailor?
It's Sailor, Sail AO. It's like the word Sail OR.
Oh, Sailor. Yeah.
They pronounce it Sailor, but yeah, they're really cool. Yeah, it was cool. It was like them and the Guild and Stellate and people from a bunch of different companies. Yeah. They Sailor helps maintain one of the other Python GraphQL implementations. I can't remember which. But yeah, a lot of good conversations we had there. There's some teams I'm not mentioning. I can't remember everyone, but yeah, there was a lot of really cool people there, really smart conversations happening, and all that. So, but yeah. So yeah, we can get some nice improvements added to the plugin API. We can pull out history and Doc Explorer as their own plugins that are installed by default for the classic setup, but maybe allow users to override that so that, like, if they provide plugins, it's only those plugins, for example. There's different ways to do it, because right now I'm imagining we would just append and we would have our default plugins if we were to separate those out, and then it would be append. I think we actually have a prop now for disabling default tabs or disabling default plugins. But yeah, I need to look up that, because there's been a lot of things that have changed on the graphical side while I've been more focused on other things in LSP. So, but yeah, speaking of, if anyone's watching to learn about LSP changes, there's some exciting things happening there as well. And but first I'm adding a lot of QA. I'm adding end-to-end tests for VS Code GraphQL, and more test coverage for the GraphQL LSP, so that we can get ready to start refactoring and add a lot more features, so to make it more performant. So talking with the guild about how to build our own loaders in GraphQL config that use VS Code's built-in file system API so that our extension will work on the web as well. So yeah, little shout out for anyone listening for that. But yeah, today seems to be focused on graphical and plugins. So yeah, I think with those two things, better plugin development experience, more plugin domain separation, and unlocking, the path to that's already there, but making it very clear that people can ship their own plugins however they want. As long, and here's some conventions you can follow with this toolkit, and then, and like the transform HTML plugin and everything, or hook, like our own version of that. Yeah, speaking of, if anyone's curious, well, I mean, you already linked to yours, but yeah, transform index HTML specifically. Yeah. So I think we'll be able to do a lot there. Make sure the theme is fully customizable. Maybe even show like a simple, like maybe even in the graphical Webpack example, show a simple, here's an example one-off plugin just for the example. That's like a schema printer or something simple, just to show people, here's how to add your own plugin without adding it to the graphical mono repo, that you can just instantiate graphical and have your additional plugins as other modules in the same workspace or repo. It doesn't have, you don't even have to publish your plugin to use it. I think people are used to more complex plugin ecosystems, and this is an extremely simple plugin ecosystem. That was the original design,
Well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory with the surface of the plugin type. Like, it's pretty self-explanatory, like how to add it in.
And as we expand on it, it should remain as such. There is, I'm starting this pattern like I did with Graphical Toolkit as well, of adding just a docs folder to each workspace that we'll use to generate a website eventually. And here is where I've added the plugin docs. So it's just a simple starting point of saying, like, hey, here's a simple, starting point, getting started for the plugin docs. And then we link to the Graphical React SDK from there, add a few other things. But then beside that is we could have a theme.md, and that's where you get some good detail on how to do your custom theme. So, yeah. And a link to say, if you find you're having to override, using CSS classes for a lot of things, open an issue here that's tagged with graphical theme, or whatever. Yeah. But yeah. Cool. Yeah. So right now, just starting with a simple graphical utils, but as I was saying, I'd like to get more advanced with it with, transform index HTML, create graphical plugin, a validator step for pre-publish to make sure all your exports are lined up. And that they follow the naming convention for plugins. I think eventually maybe we could have like an init method, and every plugin module exports an init method. The only problem is when you're doing the imports of the plugins in module mode, then you're doing import init as init graphical explorer plugin, for each import. So like, what I've done is I'm following a convention where if it's graphical plugin then the method to instantiate it is the . So Explorer plugin, code exporter plugin.
Yeah.
So we could even like go so far as to like even just like with a regex with the validator, say, does your index.dts have a method that's named?
I think the way that you're doing it now is fine. It's
okay.
fine.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. But yeah, that should
using a plugin with those changes recently, like it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's
just
easier. It's clean. It's easier. It doesn't, if you're just, especially with Explorer and Exporter, which are common, it's just easier to get up and running with them. It's just there's less fuckery around having to get it set up. So I think it's great. I think the surface is easier to understand now.
I remember reviewing these PRs where you and others were struggling with this issue and came up with the use state pattern, and I wish I'd had the focus to help. But either way, there was
a lot going on last summer.
There was a lot.
Promise was like ripping through and like doing tons and tons of work.
He was doing so much, and he had so much on his plate. And I feel bad dumping plugins onto his plate. Like, hey, Thomas, please, we could just do a simple plugin API. And he's like, oh, no, on top of everything else he was doing. I think it's amazing what he did. But yeah, I think we can help simplify things and help like come back around and say, hey, let's make this easier. Hey, let's make sure everyone knows. Like, I think we just need to like market the ability to ship graphical plugins and then add a couple more cases, like being able to have tabs for results and tabs for variables. I have this plan of making a JSON schema form plugin for variables, for example, that dynamically generates a JSON schema form when your variables change. And it sounds complicated, but we're already using JSON schema for Monaco GraphQL. I already wrote a whole utility that generates a JSON schema for variables from a GraphQL operation AST or string. So we already have the ability to do that. We just need to pass that JSON schema to something else and just have a plugin type variables or variables editor, whatever we want to call it, that lets you add a different mode of editing variables. And then we can do others. I would love to do JSON 5, just so it's all well known. I would love to do this with JSON 5, but if you look at Monaco JSON and VS Code JSON language service, you might see why that's still a little far out. They've shut down, not shut down, but they basically said out of scope any discussions about JSON 5. But there's still a possibility of adding a mode for Monaco for JSON 5. It's just that right now, the easiest thing to do with JSON 5 or with Monaco JSON is Microsoft's own version of CJSON, which you might be familiar with from tsconfig, where you can have comments, where you can have trailing commas, and that's about it. It's like, if Okay, I'm not gonna make a political joke, but it's not the JSON 5 that we want. You know,
Well,
it's
I
like
mean, it's sufficient. It's something, you know.
it's something, yeah. So we can say, here's how to make this work, but there's people who want to use actual JSON 5 who are already using JSON 5 in their implementations. And while it's tempting to think, oh well, I could just do JSON 5 parse and then JSON stringify and then use it with JSON language tooling. That would be great, but then everything's a few characters off because you're adding double quotes. I've tried this and all these things. So there's like almost, but really, yeah, CJSON is really all we have. And it just takes, it's in the Veep example. It just shows how you just enable a few features for Monaco JSON, and that allows you to yeah, be able to have a more forgiving JSON experience. But that's because of their own JSON parser. And almost every, like you'll see as well, there's now a code mirror JSON 5 for code mirror 6. It does mostly, I think it just does validation, but maybe it does hinting already. This is something, or did I say a code mirror 6 mode for JSON 5. And this is something we don't have to use. I mean, I don't think it's not JSON schema ready yet, for example. So, but me and Sam from Altair and Stripe are working on a JSON schema informed mode for CodeMirror 6. I've recently started getting into CodeMirror 6. I really like it. I've been using it for projects, and it's nice. It's not as featureful yet as Monaco. It takes a lot to get an editor to be as featureful as Monaco, but it's super nice for like a lightweight documentation type implementations and things like, like little inline editors for your docs. And Sandpack, another shout out to Sandpack, is a great example that Code Sandbox has made of like creating like basically an embeddable JS fiddle and much more customizable than that. And technically you can even add other editor runtimes to it. But Sandpack is really cool for, again, like in documentation type API docs where it's like, let's document this query field or this domain of the application, and you have like a simple example or something, or it's like a tutorial or something where you're showing use cases, but all you want is simple query variables results, like not with all the other bells and whistles. So I'm imagining like we could do something like that for Sandpack, like a mini graphical. Like if you notice on GraphiQL.org, for a long time they've had a mini graphical using CodeMirror GraphQL that's like this as well. It's not as flexible as Sandpack, but it's just a simple little component called mini graphical. And I think it's been improved over the years, but yeah, it's still just using our CodeMirror GraphQL. So, but yeah, there's a lot of implementations out there. Carbon, the thing that people use to make code screenshots. Do you know that's a CodeMirror GraphQL consumer? There's so many. I was reading their source code to figure out how to do a code, like a code highlighting validation snapshot tool like Percy, but for code highlighting. And I got so close, but our TextMate grammars for VS Code GraphQL are just too complex for any web runtime other than VS Code. Because they do this whole thing. It's a whole conversation, but we're going to have to use like a more simple snapshotting tool. But we are going to introduce code highlighting snapshots for VS Code GraphQL syntax for anyone listening. So we will have regression-free or as regression-free as possible snapshot tests for GraphQL strings and for GraphQL documents and for embedded documents. So, but yeah. So we'll have the repo will have like examples in JavaScript, TypeScript, Vue, Python, PHP, Scala, everything that we already have syntax highlighting for. So that's a whole side combo. But yeah, yeah. There's many Monaco GraphQL users out there too. I'm starting to see in stealth mode using it, you know, like in proprietary applications. I think,
Yeah.
but I think just based on the download rate compared to our CM6 GraphQL that Sam made already has way more downloads per month than Monaco GraphQL.
Yeah, I've been kind of looking around. You know, we use it in Pathfinder, but I haven't talked to anyone else that's like actively using it. It's just so
There
far
are
as
people using it, but they're forking it.
I know. Yeah, I'm just saying, like, I just from what I know, there isn't a lot of activity on the repo of people like.
Huge important improvement. Dimitri added they added new exports to Monaco GraphQL that allow us to not accidentally import all the languages, because we do this thing where we import the JSON language mode. You saw that?
Monaco, yeah.
Yeah.
They added it to Monaco editor. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a new export path that allows us. It's called like Ed Core or something. And it lets you export truly just core features of the editor. And also we can export just the language, the JSON language mode instead of CSS, HTML, and all that. So not only do we do that, but he added a test assurance where now we have a test that runs that does a Vite build and counts the amount of Monaco modules that are in the Vite build. Dimitri went all out on this. He did a great job. And that's already shipped as well. So that leads to like, I think that shaves off like over like several megabytes worth of payload. So awesome that he figured that one out.
But that's in that PR, right? That's not.
We merged it, not the it's in the Monaco PR, but then he backported it into something on main branch that just fixes the module exports.
Oh, just because we use it in the example, right? Because
yes.
Monaco GraphQL is in the examples. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. So he builds the Monaco GraphQL Vite example and tests it. So Monaco GraphQL has a test that's just that, where he has execa call like play yarn workspace graphical or Monaco GraphQL React Vite build, and then it like manually inspects the modules to make sure that.
I'm looking at it now. Yeah,
he did a really cool job with that. So yeah, I'm very happy that he did that. So it's it works quite nicely. It'll be like if we upgrade Monaco editor, our dev dependency version, it might change slightly, but it's a good way of assuring that we don't accidentally, start importing more stuff again that we don't need. And there's also a recipe there where we call, JSON, we call up the JSON mode internally in Monaco GraphQL to set the schema and configuration. We don't even have to do that. I only added that as a shortcut, right? Because there's another recipe I want to show that's just what we're doing internally you can do separately. So you can just do query editor on file change, whatever the handler for file change events, debounce it, and then you yourself import the JSON mode and call this function. It's like I added that as I made it an internal detail so people wouldn't have to set that up, and to reduce the complexity of configuring Monaco JSON, but it only is that behavior is only called up if you set JSON diagnostic settings, I think is what I called it. So if you don't configure that, then you can roll that behavior on your own. I think I'm going to add something about this to the README to show how this works. It's hard to explain just speaking. Like I'd have to just show you the code for it. But yeah,
the way that we do it, the way that I do it, yeah. Let me find it. It's
like you would have to call GraphiQL language service utils. What did I call it? Get variables JSON schema from query, or I think it's just get variables JSON schema. And so you would have to call that on the editor value. So it'd be like on query editor change, pass the value into that utility, get the JSON schema, and then call JSON mode diagnostic settings or whatever and pass in the schema. And you just do that every time the editor changes, and you debounce that for however many milliseconds.
So
I think
let me see here.
So it's just it's just a helper that I added that, but you can do that yourself. And I'm just going to update the README to explain this, I think, or add a docs section to Monaco GraphQL for like advanced usage if you want to customize that, because then that would allow people to customize the JSON behavior as they see fit. If they wanted to, I know it wasn't popular to mention even on the JSON 5 issue of because Monaco YAML is perfectly well and fine and supports JSON schema. But YAML is not as easy to work with as JSON 5, I understand. But if we wanted to support other JSON schema enabled situations, we can. So I was that's why I'm like eager to do this with like say React hook form JSON schema or something like that, because yeah, all we have to do is handle on editor change, get that JSON schema, pass it somewhere. It doesn't have to be JSON. It can be whatever is JSON schema aware. It's a powerful lingua franca for us. It is ironic, yes, that we are using JSON schema.
Let me see Ricky, let me see if I understand this correctly. So in the prototype that I built using Monaco, this was last year. There, once you have an instance of the Monaco GraphQL API, there's a method called set diagnostic settings, and that's where you can choose to validate the variables JSON, where you pass in the
JSON schema,
the operations model, and you pass in the variables model. And then there's
that's
also
a configuration interface abstraction that I created around this behavior that you can do yourself. And I'll just document how to do it. It's hard to explain.
You already have it documented. The only way I knew how to do this was because it's in the README.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying I have it documented how to do it through Monaco GraphQL, but there's a way where you can call it this behavior independently and do it in a more customized way. Is all
I understand. Okay, I understand. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I made it like and I brought this up because this is part of why all the languages got imported into the Monaco GraphQL bundle. Like whenever you bundle Monaco GraphQL, because we're doing import languages from Monaco editor, that there wasn't really at the time another way to import the language, the JSON mode in ESM that didn't accidentally import all the other modes that we definitely don't need. Not to discount HTML, CSS, or TypeScript modes. They're great, but our users don't need them usually. So, and this overrides that in a way that even messes with like the bundler plugins for Monaco, like Beat and Monaco. So his solution fixed that for now, so that now it only imports languages.json, which is all we need internally to call it this logic. But I'm just pointing this out because we could also just pull that logic out and just say, if you want JSON variables completion, just set it up in this way manually. And I know I'm making it sound complicated, but it's like only 20 lines of code. Once you have a query editor instance, it's just 20 lines of code. You know, the debounce is like an implementation detail, although you definitely don't want to call this on every type event. But yeah, like I'll create a Monaco GraphiQL /docs/advanced.md that just has some additional details for this or something.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah. And also DocSite, I think, could be coming sooner than later. So Dimitri is also a co-maintainer of the Nextra ecosystem. And I don't know if you're familiar with Nextra, but it's this nice, very nice abstraction layer on top of Next.js that's like gives you kind of like a nice little blog doc site theming system. It's a nice, it gives you more flexibility than like say Docusaurus if you want to create a custom theme, for example. And I think it's a really exciting thing. So yeah, and it looks like the guild has been switching to this for a lot of their stuff. I switched to it for my personal blog, although I want to customize the theme now. But I'm using a pre-existing theme, and it's pretty nice, yeah. And I think we would probably need to create our own doc theme, but their doc theme is pretty extensive and customizable for sure. So, but I think we would probably need to like create our own theme for it, but the theme is just like a dozen files maybe, you know.
Yeah, it looks like there's plenty of examples.
Yeah, it's a whole, I guess they just got some gig with the French government to redo like thousands of their doc sites.
Oh, that's great.
So I'm happy for Dimitri, but this also might mean they will need to give him some help on the Monaco effort because he's got a lot of exciting things happening.
I think the only thing left with I had a quick review of the Monaco effort. The last piece that we don't have yet is the connection to the Doc Explorer. And we're going to have to rethink that because with the hovers in CodeMirror, you can put a button in there that you can't do that with Monaco.
Well, we have Markdown in Monaco. So we can add links with hashes, for example. So let me show you how to do that because there are layers of abstraction. It's possible. Actually, I think we'd have to go all the way down. Yeah. Like,
I feel like I looked this up recently and it's not possible.
It is possible with Markdown. Like you can override the Markdown. The way we're doing Markdown now for the hover and stuff is that we're just showing, like we actually already are generating Markdown on the fly for the symbols, like the query fields and stuff. So you know how the query fields are highlighted? That is Markdown that I added. So I think I even added something for linking it if you want, but we just need to add a wrapper to say, link this, like a configuration that says, link base, like maybe like provide a function that generates the hash for each symbol or each field selection when you're hovering it. I know it sounds complicated, but you're going to be amazed at how easy it is to do. And it is definitely possible. You'll find issues in Monaco editor repo where people just are like, this doesn't seem possible, but it is because they have their own Markdown renderer that renders the Markdown for all of that. But we're already taking the user defined like field.description and we're putting that below Markdown that we're already rendering ourselves. This is all happening in GraphQL language service interface methods. So those interface methods now have a use markdown config or something like that that then generates a markdown version. And we're using this in VS Code as well because VS Code supports this, but we would just need to add to the GraphQL language service methods the ability to you can see it in like the worker where we're instantiating the methods, and I pass use markdown true in some places, I think. And that's where we trigger the behavior, but the generation of the markdown happens in like the GraphQL language service methods itself. So the hover, get hover, I think it's called, method is now contextually, if you provide use markdown, it's generating markdown.
Yeah, but so I'm looking at it now. I could be wrong about this, but that markdown string, there's an interface for that, generates markdown. It has an option to support HTML, but that HTML option only allows a specific subset of elements.
Yes, but what I'm trying to point out is we don't even need HTML. We can just generate markdown with anchor links. And we just use the anchor links. And we have a listener that handles the anchor link, the anchor tags, for example.
I don't think anchor tags are allowed inside of that mark. I think it strips it out of that markdown, doesn't it?
No, anchors definitely work. If it's just a link with an anchor, yeah. I'm not talking about anchor tags. I'm talking about just adding hash and then a serialized version of the field set or type or whatever they're clicking on.
What does that trigger though?
That would then trigger some behavior that those when you click that link that we could intercept the have a listener for clicking those elements. Like, so as it comes up, we attach a listener outside. I know it seems like a hack, but it's totally possible. I spent a lot of time thinking about this in 2021 when I added all the markdown support, and there's definitely a way.
Yeah, that's the issue I'm looking at is it's a discussion. It's from 2021.
Yeah, I think we would just attach a listener, and then destroy it when the popover hides or something, and we can control that in Monaco editor main process. Yeah, I think it would be the easiest way to do it. It's messy. I think we can we can do a relatively nice way, but it's still going to be annoying to not be able to insert the HTML we want. But I think the anchor tags thing will work well because I think it could make it easy for other implementations to figure out their own way of handling that.
So that hash is just effectively like the AST, the keys of the tree as you go down.
Something like that, yeah. So like we're already generating in Markdown and highlighting. I just surround it in GraphQL tags. If you can see, like it's like triple tick GraphQL tags that I surround it with, and it looks beautiful. But all we need to do is add a link to that, and then have it say like, yeah, like let's say like post ID or something like that, you know, where it's like post.id translates to post_ID. So we just have a simple normalizer, and then we can make that a configuration detail of saying when you're setting up Monaco GraphQL, you say enable, you know, documentation links, and then here's the function to generate the documentation links.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah. See, I need to jump in on that. I'm glad I explained it here because otherwise I would have taken like 30 GitHub PR comments to explain this. But what I can also do is just add it to Monaco GraphQL upstream or as a PR to his PR, maybe, and at least get that part going of adding that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's asking for it right now. If the draft Monaco PR, like once that's ready, this could follow that up very quickly, right? With this Monaco GraphQL fix.
Yeah, it's something I would like to have supported with the new Monaco release because I think we underestimate how widely used this feature is.
Well, no, I mean it's critical. It's in order to get parity with CodeMirror, this is critical. So I would say like if it's I know it's not trivial, but it should just go into that Monaco PR. There's really no reason to separate it because it's such a core feature of the Monaco integration. Like the way that it works right now, this has to work or else it's not gonna work.
Right. Here's something else I want to point out that's going to be very important for this too. I think so. ChangeSets recommends for pre-releases to use a branch. So instead of like they recommend to not use your main branch for pre-release. When you go to Yarn, when you call ChangeSet enter pre ChangeSet pre-enter, I think is the command. And that allows you to enter a pre-release state. The documentation tells you to not do that against main branch. This is why we've had this issue where we try to do it and then everything's blocked by the pre-releases and everything gets tagged as pre-release. So what we should do is do a release. I think we can do it now that our change sets are clean, and then we can just create a branch right off main right now called Monaco, and then target his PR can target that. And then we merge into that and then call yarn change sets pre off that branch. And then what we'll get is as many as 2 version packages PRs at one time. There'll be one for main branch if we have hot fixes and other like things for VS Code, GraphQL, and the LSP that are unrelated. And then a special pre-release cycle that we can do where the changelog will stack up against this Monaco branch, and then then it'll be much easier to issue a set of pre-releases, and then when we merge it, the change logs get merged in nicely. Yeah. So that way we could still do like a little hot fix to graphical or whatever things that are unrelated to Monaco, and then and I will help with the merge if there's any messiness. I know we don't like these. Hopefully this will be like a month long at most feature branch. I hate to use the word, but let's call it a pre-release branch.
Yeah.
It's like not calling it a meeting. We'll call it a gathering. No. Don't want to use the cursed word. Yeah. So, but I think this is a great case for it because then I'm not like, hey, I want to do this LSP release. Can I release this pre-release? And like, oh, it's not ready yet. Like this will allow us to unbundle that a bit and then say, okay, we're cutting pre-releases. And then we can ask Lee to advertise it on the graphical Twitter and elsewhere to say, hey, there's pre-releases of graphical 4. People will see it too on NPM and stuff that there's a 4 pre-release happening. And we can create excitement and get people to try it out and start bringing up and let them know that we're open to bugs. Maybe like once we're like we could start in like alpha, and then once we get to beta, we're open to bug reports or something. We could set up some kind of a approach that we want to use with that. So we can say, here's alpha, try it out. But we're not even ready for bug reports. Now here's beta, or here's release candidate. Now we're ready for bugs. And then we can solve a lot of things before we hit 4.0 stable.
Yeah, I'm really unsure exactly what the load is going to be like when with the Monaco switch. Who knows how many people are tying into the reads and the writes to the editor right now in like interesting ways. Like we're talking about with these plugins where they're taking the value of the editor string, the document string, and they're munging it and then sending it back in. Like who knows like how that's going to work with Monaco World. So I don't know what that load is going to be like, but I clearly I'm hoping that it's minimal, right? We're not doing.
I think it should be. I think those are the 10% cases again. The 90% of cases, they'll be like, "Oh, this is great."
Well, we're also not doing. Let me verify this, but I don't believe that
and the fact that we've already been testing it, Monaco GraphQL against Next.js with React, means we've cut out a lot of other potential integration bugs as well. And you had that fix for strict mode that, in fact, now that I think about it, Ryan Matthew had about the same fix where there was an is editor loaded state for each editor. We created a common editor component for Monaco to load each of the editors, and it had a is editor loaded state that would have prevented against React strict mode and stuff. That messy example I made.
Let me look through this. We're not doing. We're not pushing the edit. Excuse me. We're not pushing edits into the Monaco editor instance, right? We're just overriding it.
I think so. Yeah, I think we're set. We're gonna do it. I need to read his PR to see how he's doing it, but I'm hoping that we're doing model set value. I think model set value will be the way to do it instead of direct editor set value. That way, it's flexible, and you could even set state on different tabs that aren't even currently loaded into the editor, for example, or things like that. And I think, but I mean, I don't think it makes a big difference if the current model that's loaded, you do editor set value, it would have the same impact. But yeah, I think what I'm hoping is that what we continue doing, what we should be doing is when someone passes in, when we have like a use effect hook on, say, the query string, that if that changes, that we call editor set value, right? Isn't that what we should do? That's basically what we're doing with CodeMirror, or at least what we used to do with CodeMirror.
Well, the difference though with Monaco editor is that when you call set value, it runs the tokenizer again, so you get a flash.
Yeah.
Dima might have. I'm looking at the code now. I'm like looking at it deeper now. Dima may have found a workaround for that, but it's just an ongoing issue. I mean, it's not an ongoing issue. It's just the way that Monaco works. If you want to skip retokenization when you want to insert to the editor, you have to use push edit or
push edit. Yeah.
Push edit operations, or you have to use execute edits on the editor itself.
Yes, on the editor itself. Yes, that. Yeah, so we should be able to do that.
Well, that is incredibly complex.
Oh yeah.
Really,
because complex. you have to give it the location of what you're overwriting and everything.
Yeah, but if we're only doing, we don't do in graphical 2.0 and planned for 3 and 4, we're not doing any inserts into the editor from outside. We're not inserting from outside, right? There's no, once the visual operation builder hits, that's the first time we'll be trying to insert into the editor, right? Because right now the editors, you have to manually type into the editors.
Yeah, unless someone passes the query prop, or we can just deprecate the query prop, but I don't think that'll be popular because people are using that of passing in an externally managed query state.
Even in that case, we can use push edit operations without any complexity, because you can push a single edit operation. That's the entire range.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, we can do something simple like that, and then that way avoid retokenization, but it should invoke new validation and as well.
Yep. The complexity with inserting into the editor only comes up if you're inserting partial, like
Yes.
the operation builder would do.
Right. Yeah. Like that's something we'll get into because I'd like to add like what do they use? The term that they use for when you get like the little light bulbs in VS Code. I forget what the heck that's called. There's a name that they use in LSP language for it, but code helpers. I can't remember. Either way, we should be able to do that. So that's my idea, is to replace like the merge query and other capabilities, or like if we want to do alphabetical sorting, like users have requested of fields,
that's a good,
you could like.
Yeah, we do have. So merge fragments is actually doing a
partial.
Well, let me think about it. I mean, yeah. I mean, you have to do a delete. You have to do a negative insert and a positive insert, because you'd remove the fragment right from the editor, and then you'd add it. You'd replace a spread that you're using with the selections in your fragment.
The result of merge query though gives you the whole string though. So like the whole rewritten string. So we could still do this bulk apply edit or push edit approach that you're talking about, of just measuring the whole current range and saying that's what you're replacing, and then replacing it with this huge new range. Yeah. Code actions. That's the word of what I was thinking of. Code actions is when you get the little light bulb, like the Clippy for developers.
Yeah. All right. This has been, it's 1 o'clock.
Oh my gosh.
super productive.
Yes.
Really nice to talk to you again.
Likewise. Hopefully I get hired by a company that'll take me out to San Diego and then we can hang out.
Oh, San Francisco?
Or is it San Francisco? Yeah, wherever the GraphiQL conference will be. Yeah, that would be cool. But if not, I can attend via video or something. We'll see.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Great meeting. We'll catch up next time and see you on Discord.
Yeah, see you on Discord. Awesome work with everything. See you
Cheers.
soon. Cheers.